And so if you would, I'm going to invite Dr. Thacker to come up and join us. And if you would, give him a hand and welcome him, Simpsonville Baptist. And one of the things I will share about Dr. Thacker is when we've had conversations in preparing for this evening, he has been like not promoting his own resources at all. And I said, hey, I want to give away some of the resources that you have put together and some of the folks that you've worked with. And I said, I want to do this. And he's like, well, I don't do stuff like that. I was like, great, I will. And so I created, so the things that you see, which will be over at this table, is there are three resources that I wanted to highlight for this evening, just so that we're able to kind of get you on the realm of consideration of maybe some things to think about when you think of the digital age, technology, and AI. And so you can scan the QR code on the papers in the back, or even take one of the papers with you. And this gives you just kind of a rough guide of what those resources will have, what those books will have in them. And so then you can also go to his website to see all the other resources. But I wanted to highlight these. And so, Dr. Thacker, before we get started for tonight, share with us a little bit about yourself. So how did you get involved in maybe some of the things dealing with AI and digital technology, because that's something that you've written quite a bit about. And just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and things you're a part of.
Yeah, so my wife and I, we live just in Oldham County, not too far away at all. We live in, right outside of LaGrange, and then I serve as a pastor at Sojourn Church North in Goshen. And so it's kind of a funny thing I was telling you right beforehand. This is the very last thing I thought I'd ever be doing. I went to seminary there in Louisville at Southern, met my wife in my last few years. We thought we were going to be church planters. I'd be pastoring a local church, and kind of in full circle, we did in some sense. It was kind of interesting, but a little bit different. And then went on to Nashville, Tennessee, where I'm originally from. So I'm a proud Tennessean. Sorry to the Kentucky fans in the room. But anyway, I grew up in Tennessee, so we ended up going back. It was kind of, we didn't think that was going to happen either, and ended up staying there for almost 10 years, serving in the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission and a public policy organization, doing a lot of ethics. And so it was actually that got me into this, because this is, again, the last thing. I just read a good book. And from reading a good book, but also disagreeing with it pretty significantly, started to ask why. And that kind of put me on this track and trajectory of writing the Age of AI book back in 2020, right before AI got cool and everyone wanted to talk about it. And then from there, just kind of spiral and going into the PhD program, starting to teach at Southern Seminary and Boyce College, and really enjoying that.
Yeah, that's super great. We were talking, so we were at seminary at the same time where we're getting our Masters of Divinity. And so it was kind of fun, just some of the classes that I'm sure that we may even sat in together and not even realize. And so one of the things I wanted to highlight, so this is one of the books, and I actually had this one for a little bit of time, maybe a little over a year, but it's the Student's Guide to Social Media. Kind of talk to us a little bit about what this book is, what this resource is, and even though our students are not in here yet, it might be really good for grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, friends that might be able to say, hey, that might be a resource for someone that I know and care about.
Yeah, this book and then these two resources actually are all being written about the same time, and they actually all correspond with one another. The idea is that we wanted a popular level book, that's what this book is, Following Jesus in the Digital Age, to help everyday Christians think about technology and the way it's forming and shaping us. What's it doing to us as people? That's really what this book is about. And when I was connecting with the publisher, especially through Lifeway, they said, what if we had some other resources to reach different kind of groups? So the idea this idea came together for students. Yes, it's about social media, but also as a really good friend, somebody who mentored me in college said, of all your books, I like this one the most. And I'm 65. And the idea it's not just for students, but to have that conversation with our students, especially about the formative power of technology and especially social media. And then also with a Bible study to explore similar themes, but in a different medium and in a different way. Just knowing that people engage these ideas at different levels in different ways.
Yeah, so these are some resources we just want to highlight to you that you'll be aware of. Like, again, you can read about it, scan. And then also the Age of AI. So I know that this has got a couple of years on it, and it's really interesting how AI has developed, right? Mm-hmm. And so I know that at first there was a lot of folks that were like, I wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole. And then you call a customer service line to get someone to help you, and then you realize, I'm not talking to a person, and that little clicking sound that sounds like they're typing, they're not typing, right? That's a computer. And so you start to realize, well, it's everywhere, including emails. I tried to write an email the other day. I think I clicked the wrong button. It was trying to rewrite it for me while I was still trying to write it. I wasn't even for sure how to shut it off. And so a lot of things have happened, obviously with AI, even since this book was written. But just kind of talk a little bit about this and the topic itself.
Yeah.
I know that we'll be getting into it. But what would this resource be really helpful for as far as helping someone that maybe, I'm curious, I'm not sure yet what to think. What would be some things that are covered here?
Yeah, The Age of AI is kind of an introductory book. And I wrote this, my publisher at the time told me, he said, if you want to be a better writer, think of someone you're writing the book for. And to be honest with you, it was my mom. My mom just retired. She worked about 50 years in the medical field. She was an office manager. She just retired. And it was interesting. She was like, there's this AI stuff. I hear a lot about it. I'm a little overwhelmed by it, but I'm also being encouraged to use it more. How do I start to even begin to think about these conversations? And that's what that book is. It's kind of an introduction to what AI is, how it's forming and shaping us, and then getting into some specific areas that I think are of concern, maybe not what you're hearing on social media, maybe not what you're specifically hearing in the news right now, but to say, let's have this conversation and start it and approach it from a distinctly Christian worldview, rooted in the scriptures, rooted in God's word and what he tells us about how we're to live in light of who he is and what he's done for us. And so that's really what that book's about.
Yeah, so I just want to highlight those things and encourage you, and thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm gonna turn it over so that he'll be able to share. I'm thankful to see that our youth have come in, and so as we get ready to share, as Dr. Thacker will go through a presentation, we will have some time designated at the end for question and answer. So as you're processing, I know some of you have your notebooks already out, you're writing, and so if you come up with questions, or maybe you came with questions tonight already, and you say, hey, these are things that I would want to ask this, just to have a dialogue, to think about it, then you'll get that opportunity. And we'll do as many as we can until the end of the night. So that way you'll know that that'll happen. So just be thinking about it and be ready. So when we do the question and answer time, you can be the first one to raise your hand. So we'll be ready to go. So I'll turn it over to you, and thank you again. And everybody, again, will you please give Dr. Thacker a warm welcome?
I don't even think my kids are that excited to see me when I get home. No, I'm just joking. But good evening. It's really good to be with you all. I just want to say what a blessing it is to be here, and thank you, John, and the whole team for the hospitality and to be able to be with you tonight. This is where I love to be, in the local church. I teach seminary. I teach college students all day long, but I love the local church, and that's an emphasis of what we get to do at the seminary and the college. But it truly is an honor to be with you all tonight. This evening, we're going to have some conversations, and what the goal of this conversation is, I shared with John earlier, is to start a conversation. There's no way in an hour session that we can even begin to answer all of the questions, nor can we even start to really, really explore the depths of some of what we're going to talk about tonight. The goal is to really stir up a conversation, so you walk away going, I want to think about this a little bit more. That would be my goal. That's a big takeaway for me, is that you are slowing down. John kind of mentioned it earlier, but especially when we approach technology, I think for many of us, there's one of two reactions. Some of us are really excited about it, and we just kind of uncritically adopt things without even thinking too much about it. There's an app, we get it. There's a new device, we grab it. There's a new service, we sign up for it. And we just kind of rush to adopt these things without a lot of adequate reflection. For some of us, though, we're on the other side of it. We're a little hesitant. We're like, I don't know about this. I think we need this, I don't know. We start to uncritically reject it. Friends, my hope for us tonight is to not do either of those two things, not to uncritically adopt nor uncritically reject, but for us to critically engage. We need to slow down, is the big takeaway from tonight, to slow down, to ask some deeper questions. Now, in our little time that we have together, I always love having Q&A, because hopefully I get to stir up some conversation and sometimes some controversy about how we think about these things. My big goal for tonight is not to say, how do we use these tools better, but arguably how they may be using us, shaping us, informing us, and actually revealing what I think the most important question, if you're taking notes, you can write this down. What I think the most important question we need to be asking in the age of AI is not what is AI, how do we use it, but actually what does it mean to be human? This is a question that the Christian tradition has long thought about, long engaged, from questions of pro-life issues from the very beginning of life to the very end of life and everything in between. And I would argue that conversations surrounding artificial intelligence are actually revealing some kind of weak and kind of shallow understandings of what it means to be human, even at times within the church. This question of what does it mean to be human, I think, is one of the key questions in the age of AI, in the age of technology, but it's not always as apparent as maybe you might think it is. It's interesting because so much of the conversation today about AI is about the potential of AI, what it's doing, what it's going to become, how we create these tools, how they're shaping, forming us. The future often either a very utopian, kind of excited view, look at all the good, look at all the benefits, or honestly, for some of us, a lot of the fear and the dystopian kind of idea. But it seems today that whether intentionally or unintentionally, many are seeking to redefine what it means to be human in light of these tools and technologies. We see this from biomedical technologies that promise drastic quality of life improvements far beyond our comprehensions to even dreams of artificial general intelligence. If that language isn't familiar to you, it will be here in a little bit. But the idea of the next stage of human evolution, you're like, this is getting weird. It's kind of sci-fi. Well, yes, that's kind of many where these ideas come from. But many today, I think, throughout our culture, throughout our society, and around the world, are embracing certain deficient visions of what it means to be human. And I think that we should be quite concerned about that. And we as Christians need to step into these conversations. Some of us, as I said earlier, are very hopeful and very excited. Many of us are actually a little fearful. And I actually think there's some good in both of those. It seems that no matter what side of this you fall on, everyone seems to recognize that something is changing. It's changing quite fast, and maybe we're not actually prepared for it. What's interesting, especially with a lot of companies, I just saw some recent stories about this in the last few days, where many companies, especially technology companies, are completely rebranding themselves. It's just a brand, by the way, to say that they're AI companies and they're embracing AI. Maybe even some of your own workplaces are starting to do this. There's a rush to use artificial intelligence in every single way. I saw this, especially as I teach college students. I think it's funny. We always talk about creating a curriculum and training our students to be AI ready. We hear a lot of times in education. And it's interesting, they're saying that employers were pushing skills in terms of artificial intelligence on, saying your graduates have to have these skills. And it was interesting, many of the employers said, well, when you get these jobs, you'll teach us how to use AI and how we can use it in our business, but we need you to be ready for it. And I'm like, maybe that's the wrong question for us to be asking. Just how do we use it rather than should we? Not just can we do something, but actually should we? Artificial intelligence, as you know, I don't have to tell you this, you don't even have to look on your phone, but if you go to any major news source right now, the front page, no matter if it's CNN or Fox News or MSNBC or whatever your preferred media outlet is, you'll find at least 2 or 3 stories about AI on the homepage, without a doubt. You don't have to check that right now, but just go ahead and take that to the bank. It's wall-to-wall media coverage, especially in social media. It's this, that, and the others about this big promise, this big idea, what's happening. There's a big hype cycle going on right now about artificial intelligence, which is good for us to cause us to slow down and ask questions. But honestly, I think there's a lot of hype and a lot of fear and kind of misinformation even about what AI is and where we're heading. It reminds me, years ago, there was a technologist named Kevin Kelly. And Kevin Kelly, a lot of times when we think of AI, many of the questions that maybe you might even ask tonight is about what happens when the robots wake up. This also reminds you of most of basically the 70s, 80s, and 90s sci-fi about when the machines wake up and gain consciousness and awareness. It's interesting what happens in these conversations. There's all these bold proclamations. Even about 2 years ago now, Elon Musk boldly predicted we were going to have human-level intelligence within 2 years. Friends, we're almost at 2 years and we're not even close. Not even close. And Kevin Kelly made an astute point. He essentially said that these predictions about general intelligence and super intelligence and all these big ideas, sci-fi kind of movie plots, he said they're always 10 to 20 to 30 years away, or they're 200 or 300 years away. Like, oh, we're almost there. And he said it was interesting because it's close enough that it feels like it's real and going to happen, but far enough along that when you're wrong, nobody's going to care. They're not even going to remember you and your kind of inane predictions in many ways. But it's interesting about this, there's often a lot of excitement around AI, but there's often a lot of fear of the unknown. And I think both of these views are actually tied to a very particular understanding of what technology is, which is really where we're going to camp out for this first little bit. It seems that everything, as I said, is changing, but it seems that we're not totally prepared. I think it's interesting that when we talk about technology, we often rush to how we should use it rather than should we be using it at all. We say, well, can we? We must. That's kind of the prediction for many of us. And many of us are fearful, but many of us are quite excited about it as well. We see this especially throughout much of Silicon Valley about the wait and see kind of approach. Well, we'll just go ahead and rush to adopt it. We'll figure out kind of the stuff afterwards, that move fast and break things you may have heard before. This innovation for innovation's sake. I would say that that is not really the right way that we should be approaching it from a distinctly Christian perspective. Again, getting back to that question of cultivating wisdom, which is a little bit different than information, just having a lot of knowledge, but actually cultivating wisdom that flows from a distinctly Christian worldview, that's going to cause us to slow down, especially in an age of speed and efficiency. The big question I want us to camp out on for a few minutes is this: is technology simply a tool? Is technology simply a tool? This is interesting throughout the history of the Christian church, but also throughout the history of much of human civilization. We would see technology as simply a tool, a valueless, kind of neutral tool. Is it something that we just use and we're responsible for its use, or maybe is there something else going on behind the scenes? Not just the question of how do we use these tools, but maybe even asking the question of how these tools might be using us, how they might be shaping us and forming us in different ways. This is that idea that I want to cultivate and model for you of slowing down. One of the goals of all technology is efficiency, speed, and convenience. Friends, why did I know exactly where I live and I know exactly how to get to campus every single day. Why is it that every single morning when I start my truck, I immediately put on Waze? Why? Do you think I don't know how to get to Southern Seminary? I've done it for 3 or 4 years every day. No, I know exactly. It's speed. It's convenience. It's efficiency. One, because it can tell me if 71 is gridlocked, which is basically what 71 is. It's just perpetual gridlock. It's going to tell me you can go this way. You can save a few minutes. It's all about convenience and speed. This is the form. This is the basis of basically every technology that's ever been created. It's more, better, faster, stronger. It's efficiency, speed, and convenience. But I think sometimes that might be the wrong question of just how do we use these tools, but rather, should we? I would argue that technology, yes, is a tool. It matters how you use it, but these tools are doing something to you. They're forming you and shaping you in particular ways. So I can't ever give this kind of talk without referencing my boys. I have 2 sons, my wife and I. We have Hollis, who's 9, and Porter, who's 7. When Hollis was much younger, he had a little Melissa and Doug wooden toy toolbox. Okay, I don't know if you've ever seen one of these things. I have visceral memories of this thing. I kind of pull back and why? Because when Hollis had that little hammer, which came with that little set, when he had a hammer, you heard the old adage before, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, I can prove to you, because I still have scars, not really emotional scars, of that little boy with that little hammer. Because what happened? When that little boy, probably 3 or 4 years old, had that little hammer, everything literally became a nail. Whether it was the actual nails that you were supposed to kind of bang into the side of it, or the screws that you were actually supposed to work on this kind of motion as a little kid, he just started whacking the screws no matter what. That's what he did with the hammer. He also would hit other things. I don't know, other toys. That was kind of the easiest one. Sometimes he'd hit the wall. He'd hit me with the hammer, because when you have a hammer in your hand, everything indeed looks like a nail. And this isn't just true for kids. Friends, if I had a big box of hammers and brought them in right now and started hanging them out, every man in the room would do it, but ladies, you would too. In about 2.5 milliseconds afterward, you start tapping things, don't you? That's what hammers are designed to do. They have a purpose. They have a design. When you have a hammer in your hand, and we say a good hammer is one that actually hits the nails well. Also, the operator matters, but anybody with the carpentry, if you have a good balanced hammer, it's actually going to help the process go a lot quicker. It's going to be easier. It's going to be more efficient in that way. We also would say it's a bad hammer if it doesn't fulfill its function and its purpose. There's a media theorist named Neil Postman. Some of us have heard of Postman before. Many of you maybe not have. It's okay. He wrote a really famous book called Amusing Ourselves to Death about the rise of entertainment culture. This is in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, by the way. So well before social media. He was really harping on cable news at the time, which was kind of fun. But it's interesting. Neil Postman writes another book called Technopoly. And essentially what he's arguing is this point, that technology is not neutral. And he says you have this adage, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and he builds on it. And what he builds, he says this: to a person with a pencil, everything looks like a sentence. Maybe if you're a writer in the room, you think about that. When you get a pencil, what do you start to do? You start to write things down. Maybe even this very second, you're writing something down that I'm saying. To a person with a pencil, everything looks like a sentence. He goes on to say, to a person with a TV camera, everything looks like an image. To a person with a computer, he says everything looks like data. Some of us that may work in IT, you know exactly what I'm talking about. One of my fellow elders, they're doing a big computer upgrade at the University of Louisville in his area this weekend, and he is thinking in data. He's thinking of transitioning the system from the old system over to the new system. Not so much what that data represents, but everything essentially is a bit of data. What's interesting is that Neil Postman passed away really before the big push of Web 2.0, especially with social media. And I have a good friend, Jacob Schatzer, who updates his adage here. And he says this: when you have a smartphone with a camera, everything looks like a status update. You thought about that before? I always note this when I go to the beach. Anybody like to go to the beach? Sunrise, you go to the sunrise. My wife loves it. My boys and I are like, okay, we'll go. But it's interesting. You go out to the sunrise on the beach, and what is everybody doing? It's interesting. They're watching the sunrise through their phone instead of actually watching the sunrise, which is kind of an interesting story for another day. But it's interesting. When you have a smartphone with a camera, everything looks like a status update. This happens at the beach. By the way, you very rarely go back to look at your sunrise photos. Also, you weird people who take video of fireworks, which is always really funny to me, because I'm like, who is watching that? They don't look nearly as impressive on your phone, right? And especially when you post it on social media, you're like, cool, you saw some fireworks. But nevertheless, when you have a smartphone with a camera, everything looks like a status update. I'm going to push it one step further. When we talk about the age of AI, when you have a powerful AI tool, I would argue that humanity begins to look like a machine. When you have a powerful AI tool, humanity begins to look like a mere machine and often an object to be hacked, which is kind of fascinating. What Postman is arguing here is that these truisms, just a true statement that's true in and of itself, they call our attention to the fact that every technology has a prejudice. It has a purpose and it has a design. It has intended and unintended consequences. Some of those are intended. The company knows exactly what they're doing when they create the tool. Many of them don't, especially about the deformative effects, not formative, but the deformative effects of things like social media. What's interesting is when social media, some of us are old enough to remember when it came out, there were these big, bold promises, right, about what social media was going to do for society. We're going to have access to more information than ever before in human history. And friends, you do. That was a promise that was fulfilled. Right now on that little smartphone device that sits right next to you, maybe in your lap or right next to you, or maybe it's currently in your hand, you have access to more information in milliseconds than previous generations had in their entire lifetime, maybe even combined. Milliseconds, 4.4 billion results. Thank you, Google. I don't even get past the first page, but I have that many results. We're overwhelmed with information. And it was interesting. The idea was we're going to have access to more information. This is going to make us wiser and smarter. Are we wiser as a society? I would argue, maybe not. It's interesting. The flip side is, especially with Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, I know for young people in the room, you don't have the blue app, you don't have Facebook as much anymore, but it's interesting. A lot of the launch of social media also, we were going to have richer and deeper relationships and community with people than we've ever had because we could connect online. This was going to be good for society. We're going to have better relationships and community. How'd that work out for us? We are lonelier than any generation in human history, more disconnected. We're connecting more, but we're arguably not any closer to people. We're lacking wisdom and often community. This is because there are both intended and unintended consequences. Technology is not neutral. That's the big takeaway if you want to write something down. Technology is not neutral. And what's interesting is that we're often so blinded by the formative power of technology that we fail to see what it's doing to us. Technology is forming and shaping us towards that goal of efficiency and convenience at any cost. Convenience and efficiency are not bad things, but they're really bad goals in life. The goal isn't just to make more money. The goal isn't just to do things quicker and faster, more, better, stronger, but actually they're higher goals, especially for Christians and what we understand the purpose of the Christian life to be. Technology does not exist as a set of neutral, isolated tools, but tools, yes, that we are responsible for our use, but they represent the values of our larger culture, and in particular, they form our view of the human person in very specific ways. So we're talking about how technology is not neutral, especially AI is doing something to us. So what is AI? When we talk about what artificial intelligence is, it's kind of not a know it when you see it type of thing. It's interesting. So many years ago when I wrote the Age of AI book, I had so many people say, well, I don't really use that AI stuff. And I'm like, friends, you actually use it every single day, whether you realize it or not. Do you do online banking? Do you get social media information, communication tools? Do you use email? Like John told us earlier, he started writing an email and AI started rewriting his email. If you use any smart device, that's the smart part, by the way, it's powered by algorithms and artificial intelligence. You're using AI from your coffee pot to your refrigerator to your washer to my truck has built-in AI. It's fascinating. We are using artificial intelligence every single day, and no, I'm not just talking about ChatGPT. You use it, whether you recognize it or not. It's doing something to us, but often we fail to recognize even what it is. I would argue that artificial intelligence is, simply put, is non-biological intelligence. You're like, thanks, buddy, that was really helpful. But it's the ability of a computer to do something that we thought was once reserved for a human being. So fascinating that often how we talk about AI, and AI, the definition continues to kind of get pushed. We keep moving the goalpost a little bit. Well, are the machines truly intelligent? Well, now they're doing this. Maybe they are. It's interesting about what's happening there. But AI represents a broad field in computer science and comprising a number of disciplines like machine learning. Sometimes you've heard this language, or deep learning, or natural language processing, i.e. Siri or Google or Alexa. I don't want to say it too much because one of these devices will probably light up here in a second if you say its name. You get into robotics and machine vision, speech recognition, and even generative AI today. We have so many forms of artificial intelligence, but we rarely slow down to say what it is. I would put forth there are three different general ideas when we think of AI, three different types of AI. The first, and it's the only one that we know we can create. There's actually a big debate about the next two, but the first one is what's known as narrow AI. This is essentially every form of artificial intelligence you've ever heard of or seen or ever used. And what it is the ability of a machine to do a narrow set of tasks, not just at a human level, sometimes even surpassing you, meaning a calculator is not really intelligent, but it can when I use it, it can do things that I can't actually do. I'm really not good at math. The admissions department at Southern Seminary was laughing when they got my GRE. It was really bad, friends. Math is not my thing. But now I can have machines, I can ask it a question, and it performs that calculation for me actually quite quickly, much faster than I can do it. But it does a narrow set of tasks. Think of a Nest thermostat, for example. Nest thermostat, it does a couple things really well. I always joke Siri does a couple things, maybe just one or two things, kind of okay, and not a lot of anything else. But it's interesting about these tools, they typically have a narrow set, meaning you have to have different models or different types of AI to do different things. This is why you have something like ChatGPT in one of its large language models, and then you have another one that does something a little bit different. Maybe it's for audio, maybe it's for video. You have all these different types of AI because they're narrow. They just have a narrow set of tasks that they can accomplish. It's the only form of AI that we've ever thought of, that we've ever been able to create, and then I would argue that we'll ever be able to create. Because the next step is what's known as artificial general intelligence, what's known as AGI, or to correspond with narrow. It's called broad AI. This is essentially, you are a generally intelligent being. You can do, even my boys at 7 and 9 years old, outpace the best AI machine or best AI system, period, out on the market today. They can run laps around it, generally speaking, meaning they can take something from one area and domain that they learn and apply it to another. Very different. That general level of intelligence is essentially human intelligence. There's something different about us. Some have argued that it is the ability to reason or rationality, things like that. But the idea is that there's something different about this human-like intelligence. This is where many of the dreams about what AI is and what it will become really focus on, becoming like us. That language also matters. God created us like him in his image, and many will argue that we're creating, even using Genesis, kind of interesting, they're not Christians, but still using the text, to essentially say, well, God created us in his image, maybe we will create AI in our image. That language sometimes gets used. There's also another one called super intelligence. This is the idea of kind of a godlike intelligence, which is kind of funny when you think about it from a Christian perspective, is that God has revealed himself, Romans 1 and 2, he's revealed himself, his attributes have been clearly known. We know there's a God, even if you deny that he exists, deep down you know he exists. His attributes have been clearly perceived, Romans 1 and 2 tell us. We all know there's a God, and it's interesting we create these tools, and some of us think that they'll become like us and maybe even surpass us, taking on that kind of God-like status. What's fascinating about this whole conversation is I think that this conversation of narrow and broad and even super intelligence actually is taking a default view of what does it mean to be human, which is kind of a fascinating understanding of this whole conversation about this, what does it mean to be human, which I think is one of the central questions. Years ago, even before I had published the Age of AI book, I wrote an article about AI and warfare. This is kind of a fascinating topic to me, especially autonomous weapon systems. Some of us in the room think it's cool. It's interesting questions. And I remember writing, and I had a philosophy professor from another institution really come at me pretty strongly on social media, telling me just how terrible I was and how wrong I was. It's fine. It's going to par for the course. But he basically said there's nothing called AI. Artificial intelligence is a complete misnomer. The words don't even make sense. These machines are not truly intelligent. And he's actually onto something. That I would argue these machines are not truly intelligent. They're mimicking, they're imitating certain human characteristics. But it's interesting about how we fall into these hype cycles. We think of many of us, I'm training my kids right now, and it's kind of on top of my mind. We often refer to Alexa or Siri or Google as she. Have you ever caught yourself doing this? Or maybe even saying thank you to the machine after it does something. You're like, well, thanks for that, or thank you. It's interesting, we treat these machines as if they're humans at times. We interact with them like they're human. Something's going on there. I find it quite interesting, and I think the big kind of key takeaway for us when we think about what does it mean to be human, I would say is the big idea here is that we often humanize our machines. We give them names. They have faces. Have you noticed that every robot has a face? It doesn't need one. It's interesting why we give it a face, why we make it look like us, why we give these machines names and treat them as if they're kind of like us in some sense, or maybe become like us at some point. I would argue that in the same move of us humanizing these machines, guess what we're also doing? Dehumanizing ourselves. We're saying that what you are as a human being is nothing more than the sum of your parts. It's nothing more than things you do and contribute. But friends, the Christian ethic reminds us that your value, some of us need to hear this in the room right now, your value, your dignity, and your worth as a human being is not tied to what you do. It's not tied to what you contribute. It's not tied to how you perform and the things you contribute. It's tied to who you are. That you are an image bearer of the Almighty God, that He created you. You have inestimable worth and value and dignity because of what God says about you. There's a German theologian once that said, God doesn't love you because you're so valuable. You're valuable because God loves you. You're thinking, what's going on? How does this connect to the age of AI? How does this connect to artificial intelligence? I would argue at the very core of many of the technologies of our day, we're not asking new questions per se. Technology isn't causing us to ask new questions. It's causing us to ask the age-old questions just in light of new opportunities. AI is not all that novel or new, even though in some sense it is. The same questions are being asked, especially in terms of what does it mean to be human. As I said, one of the most ironic things about this age of AI is that we tend to humanize these machines, but at the same time, we dehumanize ourselves. Now, time is running short on us, and so I can't unpack the historical understanding and views of how the church has approached this conversation of what does it mean to be human, but suffice to say that we tend to see that in one of three ways, that we are reasoning, rational creatures. We are intelligent. That's what makes us unique and distinct, which is kind of fascinating. One of the reasons I think there's a lot of panic and fear throughout society today is because we're looking at these machines and saying, what does it mean to be human? And watching these machines do things that we thought once were reserved for human beings. So it causes a little bit of panic, a little bit of anxiety when you say, these machines are outperforming me. They're doing more than I thought they would ever do. So it causes us to question our own value and our own worth in many ways. But there are three historic views. Often we think of ourselves as kind of reasoning, rational creatures. That's what makes us unique. We're different than the animals. We're different than the rest of creation. Some of us would say, well, we're able to relate to one another. We have a relationship with one another. We have a relationship with God. That's what makes us unique. Others have said, well, it's the jobs we do, the dominion we take. We're stewards. We are on behalf, reigning and ruling on behalf of God. We're doing things, and that shows part of our value and our dignity. And I think all of those things are true in many ways, but I would get back to the fact of just because you do these different things, you have these attributes and these capacities, is that where your dignity and value lies? What about those who aren't as rational or reasonable? Maybe those who have significant disabilities, maybe the preborn child, or maybe somebody in the very end of their life who isn't aware or communicating or doing what they once did or maybe what they once will do. Is their value somehow less than that of us sitting in a room talking about these ideas? No. They have the exact same value and dignity and worth because they're image bearers of the Almighty God. What about relationships? What about this idea of stewarding? What if you don't do those things? Or somehow there's a set of human beings that aren't really persons, aren't really valuable, don't really have dignity because they lack these things? I would argue there's a fundamental difference, a fundamental idea of what's underneath this idea of what does it mean to be human. Again, coming back to that same point of your value and your dignity and worth is not rooted in what you do. It's not rooted in what you contribute. It's rooted in who you are. That you are a unique image bearer of the Almighty God, that God made us in his image. And I would argue that nothing, including the most advanced AI system that ever will be created, can change that status that God has given you. Because God doesn't love you because you're so valuable, because you're so talented, because of all the things you do for him or for others. He loves you because of who you are and how he made you, how he created you. He set you apart. This status, I would argue, is inalterable. It's unchanging. It's something given to us by our Creator and cannot be taken away by these advanced machines. There's something fundamentally different, distinct about what it means to be human. There's another German theologian, I don't know why I like the Germans on this, but there's another German theologian named Robert Spemann, and he essentially says this. He says the idea that there's a fundamental difference between a subject and an object. Stick with me here, this really matters. These machines are mere machines. They are objects. They are not subjects. Subjects are persons. Subjects are distinct. Subjects you can have relationships with, you can talk to, you can engage with as a fellow subject. These machines, though, are mimicking and imitating many of these characteristics, but they are still hollow. It's still the machine. As Spemann goes on to say in another place, he says, there's no ghost in the machine. Even the most advanced computer scientists will sit up here and can tell you these machines are highly sophisticated calculating machines. That's all they are. They have no real understanding of the world. They have no conception of self. They don't exist. All it is essentially a very, very fancy machine running a vast amount of calculations that gives the appearance. It can imitate and mimic in many ways ideas and even attributes of what we think it means to be human. But this is what Spemann says. There's a fundamental difference between someone and something. And he says this, there can be and only one criteria for personality, to be a person, and only one. He says biological membership in the human race. You, friend, no matter how talented or maybe lack of talent you have, your dignity and your value and worth is not tied to what you do. It's not tied to what you contribute. It's not tied to the job that you have. It's tied to who you are as a fundamental. You are an image bearer of the Almighty God. And there is nothing that can change that, including the most advanced AI machine. I would argue that when we engage the AI debate, especially as Christians, we must forefront the fact of God as our creator, we as his creatures, yes, and the fact that God has created us unique and set apart, and we must keep human dignity at the very center of our engagement for artificial intelligence. This is where we're getting to the what do we do part. What do we do next? The key idea here, I would argue, is first that we must keep human dignity and wisdom at the very center of our approach of all technologies. That we have to ask the question, not just can we do something, but should we? You see, that pause, that step is a little bit different. I can do a lot of things, but should I? Is it good for me? Is it good for what God has called me to do as a husband, as a father, as a pastor, as a professor? Is this good for me? Rather than just, can I do something? We must recognize there's a fundamental difference between someone and something. Keep that center on human dignity. That's really the whole basis of this book, is that we are unique, we are set apart, not because of the things we do, but because of who we are, created in the very image of God. That keeping human dignity. So maybe you think of you're in business, and maybe your boss is saying, hey, we really need to use this new AI system. This is going to expedite this area and make things a lot faster. I would ask the question is not simply what increases profit margins, what gets the job done faster, but how are we highlighting and focusing on human dignity in the midst of that? Profits are not bad, but they're really bad gods. Profits are not bad things to pursue. Convenience are not bad things to pursue. Efficiency, not a bad thing to pursue, but at what cost? The key question I want you to write down here, especially as we get into this question of wisdom, which really our second point, so keep human dignity at the center and also to cultivate wisdom, is to ask three simple questions. This comes from Jacob Schatzer, by the way, but these three simple questions. What is gained in using that technology? What is lost? Because remember, nothing's neutral. Things are gained and lost. So what is gained, what is lost, and what is changing? What is gained, what is lost, and what is changing? That paradigm, I think, will help us get to the second point of cultivating wisdom, to ask the question of should we do something? Is it worth the cost? It's interesting as a professor, especially teaching young people, teaching college students, they often are asking the question, well, what gets this assignment done faster? And my question for them is actually, is the goal to get it done faster? What's the whole purpose of what we're doing here? Are we simply getting here to get you a degree so you can get a job, so you can get a job, you can get the girl, you can get the girl, you get the house, you get the house, you get the praise, you get this, you get this, you get this. Is this just rat race of life? Or maybe are we doing something a little different here? What's the purpose? What are we actually after? That's a question you only can ask when you slow down, by the way. It's not just speed, convenience. We need to recognize that certain things are gained. Yeah, it makes the assignment go faster. What's lost? Maybe the hard work of thinking about that problem. Because I tell my students all the time, I'm not really interested in you regurgitating the right answer to me. I'm actually most interested in how you get there, to show your work. That's what I remember as a kid. I could do certain math problems quite quick. Maybe a couple teachers in the room, you're like, show your work. It's not simply that you got the right answer, but how did you get there? My purpose, and the purpose of education, my purpose as an educator, my purpose as a pastor, is the formation of people. Technology is a really good tool to transfer information, but it does a really poor job at transformation. The goal is not simply to get a lot of ideas and regurgitate a bunch of information. It's actually about what type of person you're becoming. And often adversity and failing is actually when you grow, when you make mistakes. You don't get everything right. As Neil Postman says, we must, whenever we're thinking about adopting a new technology into our life, he says this, we must do so with our eyes wide open. We have to understand that things are changing. What is gained, what is lost, and what is changing. Any bakers in the room? My wife is a big baker. We have lots of Pyrex bowls, like way too many of them. The fancy ones that I can't use, the fancy ones I'm supposed to use, and the ones that I can never find when she tells me to go get that bowl. But imagine a bowl of a clear bowl. I have these glass bowls that I'm picturing in my mind. You fill it full of water. This is an illustration that Neil Postman uses. He says, when you have a bowl of clear water and you take some food coloring, and you take a drop of it and you drop it into the water, what happens? He says the bowl, it dissipates. I don't know the fancy scientific term here. The bowl of clear water becomes a bowl of pink water, right? He uses this illustration to say that technological change is not additive, it's ecological. Stick with me on the terms, it really matters. It's not additive, it's ecological, because what happens? I don't have a bowl of clear water with the addition of a couple drops of food coloring, do I? I have an ecological change. The whole bowl of water is changed. There's something fundamentally different. He used the illustration, you don't have old Europe plus a printing press. What do you have? A brand new Europe. Everything changed with the advent of the printing press. Everything. Including even that of the church at times, in terms of the emphasis on Scripture and the ability to have access to Scripture in our own language, to have your own personal copy of it. You have a whole new system, a whole new change. Technological change is not additive, just dropping a couple drips of coloring into the bowl. There's a whole new change, an ecological change. We must recognize that technology, especially that of AI, isn't just an additive thing. You're not just adding technology, adding AI into your everyday life. It's changing everything. What is gained, what is lost, and what is changing. These tools are not neutral. They're doing something to us. They're forming us in very particular ways, especially our view of what a human person is, that we often attribute to simply the things we do rather than who we are. We must go about cultivating, well, hopefully this kind of conversation at least starts the conversation, to cultivating a sense of wisdom, which is really at the core of the Christian life. It calls us to slow down. It's not simply about more, better, faster, stronger, but it's slowing down. Think of the Proverbs, I think 13 or 14, talks about the glory of gray hair. Can I get an amen? I got a little bit of gray hair here. My boys like to point out, my wife does too, and a streak going in here. Gray hair is gained slowly. Wisdom is gained slowly over time, right? It's not something that is an overnight type of thing. You don't go to bed unwise and wake up wise. You don't go to bed foolish and wake up wise the next day. It's something gained slowly over time, often through adversity and failing. Wisdom at the very core of the tradition calls us to slow down, to think deeply, I would argue, about the nature of technology and what it's doing to us. And especially amidst those who may have some fear and anxiety about AI, I would just want to remind you that God is God and that is not changing. No matter what happens, no matter the technological advances of our day, God is not caught off guard. He's not like, what in the world did you make? I can't believe you guys did that. God is God. He's the creator. We are his creatures. Nothing is going to change those realities. But here's the deal. When we engage, especially the big controversial and difficult questions of AI today, I think we must do so with a steadfast hope and a reminder that God's word is more than sufficient to help us navigate the challenges before us. More than sufficient. He has given us everything. Think of 2 Timothy 3:16 through 17, that all scripture is God-breathed. It means it's authoritative and it's true. And it's useful for teaching, for rebuke, for correcting, and training in righteousness so that we may be complete and equipped for every good work. God's word helps us to navigate the challenges before us because these challenges aren't all that new. They're the same age-old challenges and questions and debates that we've always asked, but in light of some new opportunities. AI and technology is not going anywhere, friends. You know this, but I need to remind you of that. This is not a flash in the pan. This is not a fad. This is kind of the new world that we live in, this age of AI. And we need to slow down to ask deeper questions, to recognize that technology is not neutral, that it's doing something to us, to ask the hard questions and do so in community. And I just want to encourage you, you've already taken the first step, by the way. You came on a Wednesday night to hear a guy talk about AI, and you're like, why am I even here? Well, You started a conversation about cultivating wisdom, and maybe you'll slow down and continue on here through the discipleship resources here at Simpsonville and start to understand a little bit more about the nature of technology, what it's doing to us as human persons, and how we can slow down to cultivate wisdom to navigate these things with hope. So with that, we're going to turn over and do a little bit of Q&A. John has a mic, and so he's going to come to you so we can all hear your great questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. A lot to process, a lot to continue in the conversation, and if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, but I'm going to share something as well. We've got our students in the room tonight. I had a conversation I could ask 1,000 questions. I got lots of things. But one of the things that stood out to me was I was having a conversation with a college student at where I work full-time, and she was telling me about a project she was working on, and this research paper was about 12 pages long. And so I was asking her about it, and she couldn't give me any information but what this paper was that she had just turned in. And I just flat out asked her, I said, how much of AI was a part of your research to create the paper? And she said, all of it. And it was really a heartbreaking moment, I think, because we see in the scriptures how perseverance comes with those trials and the failures and things like that. And with our students that are in the room, that this is a new technology to them, it's developing, and they may know it better than most of the adults in the room. What are some things that you would use to maybe encourage them on how using that technology may end up negatively impacting them in their lives, and things that maybe they want to process when they are choosing to use that technology to maybe skip over certain steps?
Yeah, this is one of those questions that let's just say it's the end of the semester at college, and I'm having to deal with a lot of AI right now, just to be really honest with you, even within Christian contexts. The first and foremost, I would say I understand why many people use it, especially many of my students. I like to remind them, I know exactly why you're using it. One, because you have too much on your plate, you don't feel equipped and adequate for the task at hand, and you probably didn't plan very well. Very rarely do I have a student who works for weeks and weeks and weeks on their paper who uses AI. It's typically the guy or gal, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours before it's due, maybe the day before it's due, and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to get this done. Maybe I can use it. So you're tempted to use these things. I would just caution you. Look, this is not a young person problem. Maybe I can get a yes and amen for some young people in the room too. This is an everybody problem. But specifically at a younger age, you don't know what you don't know. That's another truism. Nobody knows what they don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And here's the thing I like to tell my students, at least. I have appropriate expectations for you. I don't expect perfection. A perfect grammar, a paper that is perfectly edited, has perfect grammar with 0 typos. Some professors may want that. I don't, actually, because I want to see that you did it. And by the way, you're going to make mistakes just like I make mistakes. Even Dr. Al Mohler, president of Southern Seminary, makes mistakes. Shocker. He has people edit his stuff, just like I do, and you do too. You can't learn if you don't make mistakes. That's just part of learning, is failing, that adversity and things like that. And so I always like to remind my students, one, you don't need to use AI. There's often a push, which is really funny to me as an educator, because I had, for some reason, a student account, or they had like my student email address, one of these AI companies. I don't know how they got it. And then I had a faculty account because I use it pretty regularly trying to find AI and just testing and asking questions. But within a couple hours, I received 2 emails from the same company to 2 different email addresses, one of which said this: do you want to write better papers, get better grades? You need to use these tools. Then about 2 hours later, I got another email from the same company. Want to find out which students are using AI? This is interesting. Maybe this company isn't actually doing what it's billing itself as. Maybe there's other motives for them to use and market this stuff, because there's money to be made on both ends. And all I want to say is that, 1, it's not worth it. 1. 2, you need to make mistakes. And 3, I don't understand the purpose of education if we're here just to transfer a bunch of information and get a fancy degree on the wall. Because what's going to happen when you get into the workforce is you're going to be asked a question and you're not going to have the tool that you can run to. Or when the tool fails, what if it makes a mistake and you don't know it? There's all sorts of things. And this is one of the interesting things, especially with student use of AI, that I've found, is that often I'm like, that's not true. They never wrote that. You can't possibly know that at 18 years old. I know it. And then when I ask them about it, kind of like what you said, John, there's this blank stare. Why are we trying to impress people? Why don't we just meet them where they are and navigate those things and cultivate wisdom? And so to me, it's not worth it. I would just highly, highly discourage some professors, encourage it and push it. I just don't think it's worth it, nor is it the true purpose of education, just to fill your minds with lots of information. It's actually to see you become a different type of person, which you need to do through adversity and trials.
Thank you. And raise your hand if you have a question, but I have one here.
Well, thank you so much for coming this evening and talking to us about this. I think a very important subject. And you're right, higher education's teaching, learn how to learn. I agree with you on that. My question's kind of twofold. The first part of this question is that as AI is starting to get more adaptive and starting to pick up more of what humanity's throwing down, there's a couple of things that I'm kind of interested about your opinion on. Is that one thing is that there's been reports that artificial intelligence has actually been they've been doing tests on trying to kill the AI. And so it's been learning how to rewrite code, cheat, lie, extort, bribe, do all the negative things that humans are really good doing. So it's picking up not only the positive aspects of humanity, but it's also picking up the negative aspects of humanity. So you interject quantum computing into that.
Yeah.
And you just basically give a hyperdrive to an already hyperdrived brain. I understand that the concept of sentience can be diversified within this group. I can ask a definition for sentience and get 50 different definitions. But if you're going to introduce quantum computing, even though it doesn't have feelings, it doesn't have a soul, it's still picking up on human behavior patterns. Yeah. So what is quantum computing going to do to AI? And the second part of that question is, what's to stop state actors, private contractors, or governments from using quantum computing AI to create hegemonic power structures or to create levers of power and sacrifice human dignity at the state of national security?
Well, I'll answer them out of order. The second one is governments have long done this, by the way. It's about power and control in many ways. We see this especially with the Chinese Communist Party right now, but we see this with the Iranian regime. We see this in many places around the world, using technology, not just in terms of communication technology, especially with Iran, by the way, to be able to kill the internet completely when they want to quell a protest. Just shut it down. We can't do that in the United States as easily as you could with a centralized network. But it's not a question of if state actors will do this. They already are, by the way, using these tools. But not only being able to create things, not only the control, but then also the ability of using highly advanced things, especially with quantum computing and more. Quantum computing is going to pour rocket fuel on an already kind of bonfire kind of thing. It's going to explode in terms of what is possible, which is where some of my anxiety comes from, some of the fear that I do have of these tools. Again, just because these machines can process and mimic and imitate, I don't think that they're like us. They're not sentient, if you want to use that language, or conscious or aware. They're fundamentally different, because here's the point. Some of you are going, I don't know what sentience and conscious, all of this kind of, you are not simply a material thing. The Bible's actually quite clear about this. You are not merely a material thing. You have an immaterial part of you as well. And this is where Christians have long debated the relationship of the mind and the body, or those type of things. But you are not simply a material thing. You're more than that. But here's the cool part. Your body also matters. It's part of who you are. It's central to who you are. But God is spirit. God is immaterial. There's an element that we are also spiritual beings. There's something fundamentally different. I think that you're only going to see machines mimic and imitate and long fool us. Think of the Turing test and all of that kind of stuff. To fool us into thinking they're alive. But here's the interesting thing. They're going to be able to outprocess and outpace us to solve problems that we give them in ways that we simply just don't understand. We don't have the ability to understand. This is actually kind of an interesting thing with AI, what's known as a black box. We all know that in terms of airplanes, like a black box. But many of the most brilliant minds in the world simply don't even understand how these algorithms are even working. They set it up, they give it a parameter, they give it a question, and then interestingly, it answers that question or solves a problem in ways that we never even thought of. that's where you get kind of breaking the mold a little bit, going outside of what we expected, and that scares us a little bit. And I think we need to be quite aware of that, especially when we give it access to really important data or put it in control of very important things, from nuclear warheads down to other things as well. We need to be very cautious about that because of the power of technology and what it's doing to us, especially in terms of how we view the human person. Yeah, there's a lot more that could be said there, but yeah, that's at least to start the conversation.
My name is Gage. You kind of already answered my question, but I'm kind of going to ask a different question. One thing that I think makes a human is that humans can learn and adapt, and it seems like AI can do the same. I was wondering what the difference is between humans learning and adapting and then AI learning and adapting. And this kind of goes off of Bryce's question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, by the way. This idea that we are learning, that we are rational, reasonable, we can reason and ration, we have intelligence, we can learn things. I would argue that when you, quote, learn something, you learn it very differently. You don't just memorize a set of things. There's something fundamentally different about you learning a new skill or something to that effect. It's funny watching my kids as they grow up to learn, you know, there's a... her name is Noreen Hertzfeld. She's a computer scientist, also a theologian. But she was talking about this in a recent conversation I was having with her. She said there's a fundamental difference between a machine learning the difference between a dog and a cat and my boys learning the difference between a dog and a cat. What's the difference? Well, my boys, they don't just, you give them 10, you give an AI system 15 photos of dogs and 15 photos of cats, and it guesses at first until it starts to learn the difference between a dog and a cat. It has no real conception of what a dog or a cat is. It's just recognizing patterns in the data. The interesting thing was there's a study done where the system was correctly identifying dogs and cats in this set of images until it was given a new set of images. And it could not tell the difference between a dog and a cat. Why? Because the dogs in this illustration were always on the backdrop of snow. It was like a white, snowy background for whatever reason. The system thought the difference between a dog and a cat was the color of the background. It has no awareness. It has no understanding of what's going on here. It, quote, learns, but it learns fundamentally different. My boys know the difference between a dog and a cat because of the way they experience, the way they understand, and they have a conception in their mind's eye. My boys have a dream of their perfect dog, and they know exactly what it's going to look like, exactly what they're going to do. That's very different than what a machine does. A machine is processing information. My boys are thinking, dreaming, imagining. That's fundamentally different. Even though they're both learning, they're learning in fundamentally different ways. One's processing information, the other is not. But here's something that's interesting, especially blurring that line that I told you, that question, what does it mean to be human? It's interesting, though, and I've caught myself recently, I've tried to stop doing this. I'll tell my students, I love watching the light bulbs go on or come on, or I'll talk about I can see the gears turning. What am I saying with my language? I'm trying to indicate that I see those aha moments, that you're getting it. Some of you, I can see your heads nodding. You're like, you're getting it. But I'm using language that treats them like a machine. The lights came on. The gears were turning. I'm misapplying categories. And so I stopped saying that I'm watching the lights come on. And what I'm actually saying is I'm seeing those aha moments. Because you are a human being. You learn, just as you said earlier. You're learning, yes, but you're learning differently than that of a machine. And there's a fundamental difference there in terms of a subject and an object, theologically and philosophically speaking.
Hi there. I think this is a question that a lot of us parents of young kids specifically is, he and I both work in software-related fields, and unfortunately, AI is part of our world now.
It's everywhere.
And so, like, one of the things that we are trying to figure out is how do we raise our kids? We're both very classical education. We want them to learn Latin, you know, all those kinds of things. But I also don't want them to be unprepared to go into the workforce. So, like, where do you draw that line of basically teaching them how to use AI, but not relying on AI?
That's an excellent question. And this is for younger students, this is for older, and let's be honest, for the rest of us in the room too, is where is that line? Look, friends, I'm not here to tell you to uncritically adopt or reject technology, especially AI. I don't know if you know this or not. We're not going back to yesteryear. We're not going back to the old thing, the old way. The old ways were good for some, but not for all. And there's also something gained, especially in a digital technological age. I'm not here to say stick your head in the sand and act like these things don't exist, nor am I going to say just to embrace it at any cost. I'm trying to cultivate wisdom. So I'll just give you some examples. I have a 7 and 9-year-old. It's interesting, every single day, Porter, who's my youngest, is really excited about his birthday. It's June 11th. And he always goes to Google every morning. He knows, this is the interesting, he knows exactly how many days until his birthday. Hey, Google, how many days until June 11th? Every single day. And it's interesting, these little conversations that I'll have with him every once in a while, like, they'll say thank you, and I'm like, that's kind of funny because it's not a it's just a machine, and I kind of remind them of those things. But it's interesting, my boys are growing up, this is normal that they talk to these things. They're things, by the way, they're objects. They talk to these machines, they engage them. But I try to train them pretty early on that they're not really like us. There's something fundamentally different. Or when we have a question, we don't have an answer. Sometimes we ask Google. Sometimes we just think about it for a little bit and not rushing to default to that. So part of it, especially with whether it's classical education or whatever, my goal is to actually cultivate wisdom rather than just information gain. And so in that sense, well, how do we go about it? It's going to look different for every single family. I think for my boys, I'm constantly reminding them of those things. 1, 2, they know Daddy talks about these things and writes about these things, so there's naturally a conversation. But I also remind them of what's unique and special about them that those machines can't mimic and imitate. So yeah, there's a lot going on there, but it's a cultivation. There's not a magic line. There's not a magic age. This perfect kind of, well, this is when you introduce this technology or whatever. But my goal is to cultivate wisdom, to raise these young men in the fear and the admonition of the Lord into the world that they inhabit, not the world I wanted them to inhabit. To prepare them for the world as it is, not just the way I wanted it to be. And so my goal is not to get them to be fearful of these tools, but to recognize what's gained, what's lost, and what's changing. And to even do that pretty early on. But then continue that cultivation throughout the rest of their lives, Lord willing. To also cultivate, say, what happens when the power goes out? What happens when the internet fails? Also, what happens when it gets it wrong? My boys asked Siri the other day, or Google, one of them, some question. And they were like, well, Google said that. And I was like, buddy, it's wrong. Like, I'm just going to tell you, you cannot play Switch 2 games on your Switch 1. And it didn't matter. For some reason, the machine kept giving the wrong answer. And I was like, buddy, I promise you. And so we did a little research on our own and come to find out the machine. And that little thing is now they kind of don't totally trust it. It's like, you got it wrong one time. You told me I could play Switch 2 games on my Switch 1, and I don't believe you anymore. And it's little interesting things like that along the way. No, they're quite young. So that changes over time. But again, prepare them for the world as it is, not just the way you want it to be. Introduce these things, have these conversations, cultivate that wisdom pretty early on. I think you're already on a pretty good trajectory. Even, by the way, being here tonight and even asking that question tells me you're already well ahead of many in that conversation.
Very good. We have time for one last question. And so I know there's a lot of hands up now. You guys missed it, right? So one last question, and then we'll get ready to wrap up.
Thank you. I really appreciate your work, and you're blazing new territory. I'm going to love to see how you're going to be doing this 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. So the question I have revolves around the idea of using and managing AI so AI doesn't use and manage us. And I have discovered sort of like a tool I could use now, but with quantum and everything coming, I don't know if this tool is going to be available to me. But here's what I've done. I've asked, and this is particularly involved in like social issues, not just like calculate something for me or find a lot of data for me, but when I'm asking a meaningful societal question. And I'll ask one AI like ChatGPT, what do you think about this and what's your answer? And then I'll ask a different AI tool by a different company the same question. I get different answers.
Yep.
So what then I'll do is I'll take the same question, but the answer of the first AI, Then I'll ask the second AI, why did the other AI come up with this answer? And what can you infer or guess? Are there algorithms that made them do it that way and come up with a different answer? And which answer do you like better? And then after they give me that answer, I'll ask a second question is, for each of you, what is the way that your company is, how is the way that your company is financed? How is your current revenue? And what are your revenue projections and profit projections impacting the algorithms that the other guy is using versus the ones that you are using? And it's interesting to sort of get them to work off each other, but pretty soon somebody's going to catch on to that and not let us do that kind of thing. And what are the kinds of things we can do to keep AI honest because of the human wisdom that we have, which can go under the covers and back asking questions that even the owners and the AI systems aren't really taught to give us.
Yeah. Well, you already get at a point that these machines are not neutral. One, they're created by human beings with certain values. Also, their company values. Also, their profit motives. So just to throw it, it's not neutral by any means. Yeah, that's one way of kind of going about it. I guess a couple things to say is, one, that seems like a lot more work than me just trying to research the question on my own. So there's that. Sometimes the things that we think are speeding up and making things more efficient actually are just slowing us down in other ways. So there's that part of it. But even asking that, it's interesting because I can ask, this happened the other day. I asked, it's actually about this book. I had a student who did not read my book, which was, I don't really care that you didn't read it, even though I wanted you to read it because I assigned it to you, who said, one, I thought the machine, when I asked, did you use AI on this? She said, yes. I thought the machine had your book, and I didn't really totally understand what that meant. But it had access to your whole book, and I said, well, friend, it told you in a 4-chapter book, it told me I had 7 chapters in this book. I have 4, which is kind of interesting. So it was right out of the gate, I was like, something's wrong here. You didn't do this work. So there was that element. But it's interesting because I can ask the same AI, not even asking a different companies, the same question, and I get 2 different answers. Or this happened today, I had it summarize something I had already read. I just wanted to see what happened. And I had already read it, and I asked the machine, I said, summarize this, and it told me, and I said, that's completely wrong. Like, not even close. Oh, you're right. Sorry about that. And I was like, 1, you're not actually sorry because you're a machine, and 2, you just predicted what you thought the answer was going to be if it was right or wrong, not even trying to willingly, because it doesn't have a will, to deceive me. So it's interesting in that sense of comparing. It worked. I mean, you could do that, comparing, contrasting, different things like that. But even the same AI, what these things, they're kind of like parrots. They're just telling us what we want to hear back. By the way, that's not how wisdom is cultivated. Sometimes you need people to correct you, not just to tell you what you want to hear, or what the machine thinks you want to hear, or what the machine, it doesn't want or desire, by the way. Even my language, I'm slipping there. It's just to say that these machines are not neutral. There's company values that are informing, cultural values that we might not be aware of. So as Postman says, maybe a good way to end it is whenever you adopt a new technology into your life, you must do so with your eyes wide open to recognize what else is going on here in these conversations.
That is phenomenal. Thank you so much for sharing.